Hey guys, tonight we're easing into a cracked and sun-baked valley somewhere between memory and myth. You're not quite in a dream, but not fully awake either. The air is dry and smells faintly of olive smoke and hot stone. Somewhere nearby, a goat bleats lazily. The dust is warm beneath your feet, clinging like fine flour to your sandals. Your eyes sting a little from the wind. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the haze, two civilizations, one with its golden walls and royal courts, the other with its sacred scrolls and stubborn prophets, are already glaring at each other across time. This isn't going to be one of those stories with clear heroes and villains. No epic battles that make sense. No satisfying resolution. Just two peoples, two visions of order and faith, locked in a slow, grinding misunderstanding that lasts for centuries. And lucky you, you get to walk through the middle of it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is. I love knowing where in the world we're dreaming together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You squint under a high sun. Its light stretched like gold foil across the wide sky. The year is, well, let's just say long before Google. You're walking a brittle footpath through the ancient Fertile Crescent. To your left, the lands that would one day be called Persia. To your right, the highlands and hills of ancient Israel. Neither side looks especially inviting. The road is hard-packed earth, dry as old parchment, and your feet feel each crack as if it were etched with malice. The occasional olive tree leans at a wind-beaten angle, its leaves whispering secrets in a tongue even time has trouble remembering. The sour tang of sheep dung lingers in the air, not overpowering. Just constant, like the hum of your fridge back home. As you trudge forward, the landscape begins to change. Towering stone columns appear on the eastern horizon, ghostly silhouettes rising from the heat shimmer. That would be Elamite territory, absorbed later by the Persians. On the western horizon, a dust-colored city clings to a steep hill. That would be Jerusalem, not quite a metropolis, more a stubborn cluster of hope and tension. Stacked in stone, you'd think these two places would just ignore each other. One's got palaces, gardens, and a massive army that doesn't really need to invade to win. The other's got prophets shouting in the streets, a god who demands exclusivity, and a knack for being in the wrong place at every empire's right time. And yet, they can't stop brushing against one another. The early scribes didn't exactly write down every awkward moment. Most of what survives comes through filtered scrolls, edited by anxious priests with very sharp reads and very strong opinions. Still, we get glimpses. There are tales of exile, whispers of divine punishments, and kings who rule by decree over lands they've never seen. You might imagine a courier jogging past you right now, sweaty, sand-caked, clutching a rolled-up letter from one of those kings, sealed with wax and urgency. He's probably not stopping to chat. Now, here's where your knees start to ache. You're heading uphill, toward the heart of a dispute that would outlive empires. Israel, as it stood in its earliest form, wasn't much on paper. No vast rivers, no thick forests, just rocky slopes, hidden springs, and tribes who spent more time arguing among themselves than worrying about Persian expansion. And yet, there was a weight here. A sense that every stone carried memory. Every fig tree stood witness. That same dusty fig you pass now? It might have been planted by someone who once swore an oath to a now forgotten god. Meanwhile, Persia, rising from the east with a grace that felt almost unnatural, was busy learning how to rule without stepping on every toe. They inherited a few ideas from the Babylonians, borrowed some from the Assyrians, then added their own flair, tolerance with a dash of absolute authority. Historians still argue whether this was genius governance or calculated showmanship. You wipe your brow. The sun doesn't care about geopolitics. By now you're wondering why any of this tension exists at all. After all, when Cyrus the Great comes along in the 6th century BCE, he's the first imperial figure in history to say something nice about the Israelites. He lets the exiles return from Babylon, funds the rebuilding of their temple, even earns an honorable mention in their scriptures. You'd think that would be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. But oh no, because even favors have strings, especially royal ones. The Israelites came back home changed, divided. Some saw Persia as a divine tool, others as just another master wearing a slightly friendlier face. They argued about purity, lineage, temple control. Imagine coming back to your hometown after decades away, only to find strangers living in your house, and they think you're the intruder. That scratchy tunic of yours isn't helping. You sit for a moment by the side of the road. The earth is warm, but not comforting. Somewhere nearby, a desert bird lets out a tired cry. You feel it in your chest, like the echo of a question with no clean answer. And just as you close your eyes for a breath, the rumble of hoofbeats in the distance reminds you, the Persian Empire isn't done building. And the Israelites aren't done doubting. The dust gets in your mouth now, coating your tongue with a grainy bitterness that no amount of dry swallowing can shake. You try to spit, but your lips are too cracked. It's not just heat or sand that makes this place feel difficult, it's the sheer weight of memory pressed into the land like a sleeping giant. You pass through a sunlit valley and then crest a small hill. And suddenly, there it is. Persepolis. It doesn't shimmer like a mirage. No, it rises, heavy and still, carved from ambition and polished stone. Its stairways stretch wide enough for whole processions of men, horses, dancers, and maybe a few very nervous enemies forced to watch it all. You feel small, and not just small like, I forgot my wallet at a nice restaurant, small. You feel crushed, like a pebble in a boot worn by a very, very well-fed king. The gates are adorned with two massive stone creatures, winged bulls, crowned with human faces. They don't blink, they don't move, but they seem to know you're not from around here. Their eyes, weathered by time and sandstorms, still manage to judge you just a little. You shift your weight and pretend not to care. Inside the city, everything is bigger than it needs to be. Pillars stretch toward the sky like spears asking for forgiveness. Intricate reliefs climb the walls, courtiers frozen mid-bow. Soldiers lined up with identical beards and zero individual opinions. You walk slowly, because let's be honest, your feet are sore, but also because you're trying to read a world that speaks in stone and silence. This was the beating heart of the Achaemenid Empire. Not the dusty tent you imagined, but an organized, opulent, almost irritatingly sophisticated place. Historians estimate that at its height, Persia governed over 40% of the world's population. Which means this place wasn't just for show, it worked. Roads were paved, mail was delivered, taxes were, well, very punctual. Now, one mainstream historical fact, Cyrus the Great, who founded this empire, was perhaps one of the first rulers in human history to make religious tolerance a formal part of state policy. He didn't convert conquered peoples. He didn't burn temples. He even sent some folks back to their temples, with funding, which, yeah, is why the Israelites put him in their scriptures like some ancient guest star. Imagine being thanked by name in a holy book you've never read. That's Cyrus. But here's the quirky bit. Despite all that grandeur and good PR, Cyrus didn't build Persepolis. That was his grandson, Darius I, who likely wanted a new capital to flex a little harder on his rivals. Darius also had the flair for bureaucracy, which meant a lot of people in very tall hats spent a lot of time sitting at scroll-covered desks. You pass one now. He's muttering about grain quotas and trade tariffs. And you instinctively avoid eye contact. Persia wasn't built on brute force alone. It ran on paperwork, bribes, good roads, and slightly smug governors called satraps. It was a system designed to absorb, not erase, what it conquered. And this is where the tension starts to simmer. Because Israel doesn't absorb well, you step into a shaded courtyard. The coolness is brief, like a sigh of relief from the heat. Dancers once moved here, ambassadors traded pleasantries, religious leaders debated philosophy under these columns. Sometimes without shouting. The empire was proud of its multiculturalism, but pride, like parchment, wears thin with time. Because just beneath all that tolerance was a steel spine. Persia allowed diversity, yes, but only as long as everyone remembered who sat on the throne. It was like being invited to a royal banquet, but only if you brought your own chair, didn't speak too loudly, and agreed in advance to laugh at the king's jokes. That didn't sit well with a people whose identity was built around the idea of being chosen. The Israelites had just come home from exile. They were rebuilding, not just their walls, but their sense of meaning. So imagine being handed silver from a foreign king to help with temple repairs, and also being told to file monthly updates to a local satrap. Helpful, yes. Humbling? Deeply. And while the Persians never outright banned the Israelites from worshipping their God, there was always the unspoken reminder, you're only free because we allow it. That same scratchy tunic you've been wearing? It feels even tighter now. Historians still argue whether the Persian rulers genuinely respected Israel's religious autonomy or simply used it as a political tool, buying loyalty in scrolls instead of spears. Either way, the relationship was never equal. It was conditional, and deep down, both sides knew it. You continue walking through the palace, and your footsteps echo off ancient stone. There's no one around, but it feels crowded with ghosts, mostly bureaucratic ones, whispering about tribute, loyalty, and what to do if another empire comes knocking. And oh, they will. The paint has long faded from these walls. But once they were vibrant, blue and gold, red and ochre. The colors weren't just for decoration, they were a message. We are not afraid to be seen. You pause to imagine what it would have looked like on the day of a royal festival, trumpets blaring, incense smoke curling through the air like gossip, dancers spinning in layered silk. Maybe somewhere among the crowd, an Israelite scribe watches silently, calculating what this display means for his people's future. Your shoulders start to ache from the sun. You find a patch of shade beneath a broken lintel, once adorned with lotus carvings. The scent of old stone and faint resin sticks to your nostrils. You sit, let your back rest against history's weight, and breathe in a silence that's lasted longer than most empires. And just as your eyes begin to close, a whisper of wind carries the echo of marching boots. A new satrap has arrived in Jerusalem, and this one's not as friendly. The hill country opens up beneath your aching feet, and you descend slowly, rocks shifting under your weight with every step. The land is rugged, less majestic than Persepolis, but older in feeling. There's a kind of haunted stillness here, as if the stones themselves have been listening for centuries. You're in the highlands now, what would later be called Judea, where faith clings to limestone like ivy on a crumbling wall. There's a breeze, dry and sharp, carrying the faint scent of wild thyme and sunburnt grass. And somewhere nearby, a ram bleats in a tone that sounds unamused. This is where ancient Israel rooted itself, not in vast cities or imperial splendor, but in hills, shepherds, scrolls, and stubbornness. You pass a group of children chasing a goat through an olive grove. Their laughter breaks the silence like a dropped clay pot. And for a second, the tension in your spine eases. But the air here is thick with memory, almost like walking through incense you didn't mean to light. The city of Jerusalem, if you can call it a city, is ahead. Not the gleaming, golden-domed postcard from your modern imagination, but a cluster of dusty walls, chipped stone buildings, and uneven streets. The Temple Mount rises modestly in the distance, You're not sure if it inspires awe or anxiety. Probably both. This place has been built and rebuilt more times than most people have birthdays. Fires, sieges, restorations. Each wave of history layering itself over the last like cheap plaster. And somewhere beneath it all, a sense of something sacred refuses to be buried. Now, the mainstream fact for this part of our story. After the Persians conquered Babylon around 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great issued an edict allowing the exiled Israelites to return home. This was huge, a turning point. Whole families packed up decades of pain, took what belongings they could carry or argue about, and made the long trek back to Jerusalem. But what the textbooks often skip is what happened after the cheers faded. Because homecomings are complicated. Imagine walking into your childhood house only to find someone else redecorated. That's what many returnees felt. The people who had stayed in Judah during the exile had moved on, sort of. They'd married, adapted, maybe even compromised a little with local customs. So when the exiles came back, full of zeal and trauma and temple blueprints, it was tense. You walk through a narrow street now, dust rising with every step. The buildings lean in around you, like they're eavesdropping. You hear arguments echoing from open windows. Not loud, but sharp. Do we build the temple this way or that? Do we follow the law strictly? Or make room for mercy? Do we welcome those who stayed behind? Or cast them out? It wasn't just architecture being rebuilt. It was identity. And as it turns out, Persia's generous permission didn't settle the matter. It stirred the pot. Some Jewish leaders, like Zerubbabel and later Nehemiah, were placed in charge with Persian blessing. But even with Persian support, they were caught in a game of constant compromise. Too lenient, and you betray the covenant. Too strict, and you fracture the community. It was like trying to balance a clay bowl on a goat's horn. You reach a courtyard. An old man sits beneath a fig tree, scribbling into a scroll. He glances up at you but doesn't stop writing. The fig tree offers thin shade, but the fruit is sweet, syrupy, messy, and somehow sacred. It's the kind of sweetness that sticks to your fingers and makes you pause before turning the page. Here's your fringe fact. According to later traditions, some Israelites, particularly the Samaritans, believed they were the true remnant, preserving the faith during the exile while the others went soft in Babylon. So when the temple rebuilding began, they offered to help, and were politely, firmly, and spiritually told to back off. That rejection sparked rivalries that lingered for centuries. That sour aftertaste? That's not the fig. That's the beginning of a schism. And historians? Oh, they argue plenty about this era. Some believe Persia encouraged internal division among the Israelites to prevent rebellion. Others say the tension was purely internal, trauma turned sideways. Still others point to gaps in the archaeological record and throw up their hands like, honestly, maybe everyone was just tired. You reach the temple foundations. Workers are busy laying stones. Their backs bent like commas in a long, unfinished sentence. One wipes his brow and mutters a prayer. Another grumbles about taxes. The stones are heavy, but not nearly as heavy as expectation. You lean against a half-finished wall and let your hand rest on the warm stone. It vibrates faintly, or maybe that's just your pulse. In this moment, you understand something about the nature of this land. It's not just contested in the usual sense. It's claimed by memory, myth, promises made in thunder and broken in silence. And the Persian presence is both everywhere and nowhere. Their coins pay the wages. Their governors send letters. But they don't walk these streets. They don't argue about Sabbath rules or genealogies. They don't cry when the second temple doesn't quite feel like the first. Your legs are tired. You find a shaded bench, or rather, a slab of stone that politely agrees to pretend, and let yourself sink into the stillness. A child runs past, trailing a linen sash like a banner. Someone sings a slow tune nearby, in a minor key that makes your ribs ache. The city feels alive but uneasy. Breathing, but not quite sleeping. And just as your eyelids start to fall, a messenger from the east arrives, scroll in hand, eyes darting. The satrap's orders have changed. Again. The sun sits a little lower now, casting long shadows down the narrow stone streets of Jerusalem. They stretch like fingers, reaching into alleyways, curling under doorframes, brushing the worn sandals of people too busy arguing to notice them. You follow behind, one slow step at a time, the hem of your tunic catching on uneven flagstones. It's not the heat that exhausts you. It's the noise. Voices rise all around, not loud enough to feel like a riot, but insistent, persistent. Scrolls are being read aloud in the marketplace, prophets' words, proclamations, instructions from far-off governors. The kind of words that change the mood of a city without changing a single wall. You pause beside a baker's stall, where the scent of warm flatbread softens the edge of tension just for a moment. Your stomach growls like a lion who's been ignored too long. A young man in threadbare robes reads from a parchment, eyes glowing with something dangerously close to hope. Around him, a small crowd nods, frowns, grunts. Every few sentences, someone whispers, "Is he allowed to say that?" And you realize this isn't just scripture. It's politics wrapped in poetry. The line between prophet and politician was always thin here, sometimes non-existent, and now, in this uneasy moment of reconstruction, that line dissolves completely. Your feet crunch over scattered straw as you move toward a larger square. There, a cluster of men, some with ink-stained fingers, others with calloused hands, are deep in debate, not about whether the Persians should be resisted or praised, but whether the people themselves are even worthy of restoration. The topic? Marrying foreign women. You blink. Not quite the grand issue you expected. But to them, it is grand. It's about identity, holiness, legacy. Nehemiah, the reformer sent by Persia to help rebuild the wall, was especially strict on this point. And his public reforms? They caused deep division. Some wept at the public readings of the law. Others rolled their eyes, muttered, and went back to their vineyards. You pass one man slumped on the ground beside the square, cheeks flushed with wine. He raises a cup lazily and toasts to a time when prophets knew how to throw a party. You don't laugh, but it lingers in your chest like a spark. Mainstream history tells us this was a critical moment of religious reform. The post-exilic period saw a hardening of Jewish identity, centered around the Torah. Strict rituals, and exclusivity. But here's your quirky fringe detail. Some scholars believe that the formalized Hebrew Bible, the canon we know, began to solidify precisely because of Persian influence. Not despite it, the desire to define identity was a direct response to being allowed to preserve it. Like a museum that only opens once people realize how fragile their culture might be. You walk past a scribe carefully copying from an older scroll. His fingers move slowly, reverently, as if every letter is a seed being planted in desert soil. He pauses only to squint at the sky, as if checking whether time is still working. But not everyone approves of these public readings. Whispers of manipulation spread like oil on water. This scroll wasn't in the last version. One merchant mutters. He added that line himself. Another insists. Trust is a scarce commodity in a place where memory can be rewritten with ink and conviction. Historians still argue whether the reforms were widely accepted or enforced with a kind of quiet coercion. Some see it as a community reclaiming its soul. Others, especially from later generations, hint at something more painful. A community losing its flexibility in favor of purity. And you? You just want to sit somewhere that doesn't involve parchment, shouting, or spiritual anxiety. You find a shaded archway and lean against it, watching as a boy carries a sheep up toward the temple area. The animal doesn't resist, it just walks, calm, resigned, like it's done this before. Maybe it has. The temple services have resumed. But there's still something missing. A weight, a presence, maybe the arc, maybe certainty. People perform the rituals, but you can sense their minds wandering. Like saying sorry when you're not sure why you're apologizing. And still, the Persians stay out of it. Mostly, they watch, report, tax, but don't interfere with liturgy. At least, not openly. It's a clever strategy. Let a people believe they're free, so long as their freedom doesn't cross certain lines. And here's the sensory metaphor for your bones tonight. This place feels like a tight sandal. Formed to the foot, familiar in shape, but rubbing just enough to keep you from relaxing. You shift your weight and realize the feeling isn't going away. A few women walk past, balancing clay jars on their heads, laughing softly. You follow their voices until they fade, replaced once more by the public scribes in the square. One begins reading again. The word of the Lord came to me. And just as your eyes begin to close, a distant sound rises over the rooftops, a trumpet. Not Persian, not Jewish, it's the sound of new boots. Foreign voices. Another empire, yawning into the region like a lion waking up. Greece has entered the chat. You blink against the slanting afternoon light, and for a moment, the sound of the trumpet seems to hang in the air like a warning wrapped in gold. Your spine stiffens without thinking. Because that sound? It doesn't belong here. Not in the dusty alleys of Jerusalem. Not in the solemn rhythm of temple chants or the scratch of scribes. It's foreign, clean, polished, and vaguely smug. You hear marching now. Not chaotic or thunderous, just organized, precise. The sound of sandals worn by men who know they're winning. Alexander the Great has arrived. Well, not him. Exactly. You won't catch a glimpse of the famous golden hair or the piercing stare of legend. But you'll feel his shadow as it stretches across the region. Persia's dominance? It's crumbling like an old scroll in the rain. The satraps look nervous now. The tax collectors have begun speaking in Greek. You follow a group of travelers moving toward the city gates, some muttering in Aramaic. Others in the clipped, lyrical tones of Macedonian Greek. Their robes clash like timelines layered over one another. An old merchant whispers, "The world is changing. You don't need a prophet to know he's right." Alexander's conquest of Persia was swift and almost suspiciously efficient. One moment, Darius III was still issuing commands. The next, he was a cautionary tale. And like any conqueror with vision, Alexander wasn't interested in destroying everything. He wanted to blend it, to melt it all into something new. Hellenism, they called it later, a lifestyle, a language, an identity, wrapped in philosophy and olive oil. Here's your mainstream fact. After defeating the Persians, Alexander inherited their empire, including Judea, but unlike the Persians, whose control was somewhat hands-off, the Greeks brought a cultural overhaul. Not by force at first. No, that came later. First, they used charm. Temples, gyms, theaters. Yes, even in Jerusalem, Greek education was suddenly fashionable. Greek customs, tempting. Greek coins, everywhere. Now for your fringe tidbit. Some stories suggest that when Alexander approached Jerusalem, he was met not with resistance but reverence. One legend says the high priest came out to greet him, and Alexander bowed, claiming to have seen the priest in a dream. Historians debate the truth of that moment, of course. Some say it's propaganda. Others say it shows how eager Jerusalem's leaders were to survive. You walk past one of those new Greek gyms. It's odd, tucked among stone homes and prayer circles. Young men wrestle in the courtyard, barefoot, confident, far too cheerful for this part of the world. Their laughter sounds like glass breaking in a synagogue. You shiver, but not from cold. The older locals eye the gym with unease. Their gods are loud. One mutters, "Their wine." Louder. A teacher nearby tries to explain Plato to a small group of children. But the words feel heavy. Like foreign fruit no one knows how to peel. This is where the tension deepens, not in war, but in culture, in identity, in what the next generation will dream in. Historians still argue whether this period marked a real loss of Jewish identity or just a temporary blending. After all, the Torah was still read, the temple still stood, but slowly, invisibly, the wires began to fray. Greek drama and Jewish ritual didn't quite harmonize. Greek gods didn't politely wait their turn. You climb a stone stairway, the edges worn down by thousands of anxious heels. At the top, the temple looms, still holy, still central, but you can feel the pressure, like a rope pulled taut across a canyon. How long can something sacred survive being fashionable? Inside the temple courts, you overhear debates between elders. Should we adopt their education? Their language? Should we resist? A younger man, face flushed, whispers that compromise is cowardice. An older one shakes his head. You don't protect truth by shouting. You slip away before they notice you listening. You rest beside a small cistern. The water is cool, and you splash some on your neck, letting it trickle down your collarbone like a slow exhale. For a moment, the noise fades, just the wind in the reeds, the soft coo of a dove nearby. But even that calm has a question hidden in it. How much can you change before you are no longer yourself? A boy walks by humming a tune. It's in Greek. Your stomach tightens. But it's not all gloom. Some thinkers believed this moment could be fruitful. Melding Greek philosophy with Jewish faith could produce something new. Something powerful. A bridge between Athens and Jerusalem. It just required trust and a strong stomach. You pass a group of scribes hunched over a new translation effort. They're working on the Septuagint, the Hebrew scriptures rendered into Greek. It's practical, yes. Many Jews of the diaspora can't read Hebrew anymore. But it's also controversial. One rabbi calls it a necessary betrayal. Another shrugs. If the truth is eternal, it can survive new grammar. You smile at that, even though your feet are blistering. And just as you find a quiet alley to rest, you hear the clatter of hooves again. Not Persian, not Greek, but Roman. Not many, not yet, just enough to announce that the world is about to shift again. Because the next empire isn't here to charm you. It's here to count you, tax you, rule you. And it doesn't speak Hebrew, or Greek, or even poetry. It speaks in roads and iron. The alley smells like dust and roasted garlic. You're curled in the crook of a crumbling wall, just trying to rest your feet, when the sound of marching reaches you again, heavier this time. Less stylish than the Greeks. More practical. You peek around the corner. The boots are Roman, not the polished kind from paintings. These are worn, dust-caked, and unceremonious. The soldiers they carry are not particularly glamorous either. Just men, mostly silent, except for the occasional barked command. Spears up, shields straight, eyes forward. It's less a parade and more a machine slowly turning its gears. Rome doesn't arrive with dancers or poets. It arrives with surveyors, administrators, and very detailed census forms. You dust yourself off and follow at a distance. The streets have already started to shift for them. Jewish vendors now mutter in Latin-inflected Hebrew. Tax tables have appeared in the plazas. People line up, trying to figure out what's owed, how much grain counts as enough, and whether it's worth arguing with a man whose helmet covers half his face. Here's your mainstream fact. Rome officially took control of Judea in 63 BCE. When General Pompey entered Jerusalem, through the back gate, of course, and marched right into the temple's inner court. He didn't destroy it, he just looked around, shrugged, and walked out. A deeply Roman way of saying, nice place, ours now. You step past a group of elders speaking in hushed tones. There's tension here, not the kind that explodes, but the kind that coils under the skin. The kind that makes your teeth clench without realizing it. Rome has its own rules, its own gods, its own understanding of loyalty. And to them, Jerusalem is just another spot on a very long list. The fringe detail? Some accounts say Roman soldiers, unfamiliar with Jewish customs, were baffled by the temple's silence. No statues, no idols, just empty air and incense. One reportedly asked, "Where do they keep their god?" Which is fair. It's hard to dominate a people whose most sacred object is invisible. You feel it again, that scratchy tunic. It clings worse in Roman weather. Not because of the heat, but because of the expectations. Rome doesn't demand worship of its gods, not yet. It demands order, taxes, and silence. But the Israelites? Silence is not their strength. In the marketplace, a street preacher rails against corruption. Not the Roman kind, his own people's. He waves a scroll, yells about justice, and shoves a half-eaten fig in your direction. You nod politely and edge away. The fig is very ripe. Some scholars argue that this period marked the deepest internal fracture in Jewish society. It wasn't just Rome versus Israel, it was Israel versus itself. The Sadducees worked with the empire. The Pharisees focused on law and purity. The Essenes ran for the hills and started writing apocalyptic poetry in caves. And the Zealots? Let's just say they weren't much for compromise. You climb the steps toward the temple again. And it feels different. The rituals are still there, but now under surveillance. Roman guards stand just outside the sacred courts, watching but not interfering, yet. It's like praying with someone breathing over your shoulder. You feel it in your chest. That low, throbbing discomfort. And the scrolls? They're more than spiritual now. They're political. Every word read aloud carries weight. Every law interpreted could spark loyalty or rebellion. You hear children reciting commandments as their parents glance nervously at passing soldiers. Learning the law is now an act of identity preservation. You pause at the edge of the court, where a group of scholars argue over the finer points of ritual purity. One gestures so wildly he nearly topples over. Another scowls and mutters something about impurity by association. You can't tell whether he means Gentiles or sandals. But it feels pointed. Historians still debate whether Rome's early administration of Judea was overly harsh or simply clumsy. Some claim it was efficient and relatively tolerant, by Roman standards. Others suggest it was a slow suffocation. A choke not around the neck, but the soul. You find a shaded portico and sit. Your knees creak. The stone is warm, smooth, and too hard to nap on. But you try anyway. And as you rest, you hear the wind shifting again. Voices rise in the distance, not Roman, not Greek, Hebrew, passionate, prophetic. Another preacher, maybe, another vision of truth, another spark that might just light a fuse. And just as you begin to nod off, a Roman governor in polished armor passes nearby, trailed by scribes and interpreters. He doesn't look at you, doesn't see you. He's too busy preparing for a census. You wake to the sharp clink of a stylus tapping stone, like a slow heartbeat echoing off cold marble. A scribe is inscribing something into a tablet just a few paces away. Records. Maybe, or decrees. In Rome, everything becomes paperwork eventually. You stretch, your back stiff as an old scroll, and rub your eyes just in time to see a priest and a Roman official exchanging wary nods near the temple entrance. This is the new normal. Parallel worlds brushing shoulders in the same city. Incense and incense burners, sandals and swords, Hebrew prayers curling upward in soft spirals while Latin orders crash downward like iron weights. You get the sense that at any moment, something fragile could snap. You step into the street and walk slowly. The air smells of dry bread and lingering myrrh. A procession passes, a group of religious students. Robes slightly frayed, sandals kicking up dust as they chant half under their breath. Their voices weave between buildings like incense threads, trailing behind them in faded Hebrew. It's calming, until you notice the Roman centurion following at a polite distance. Watching, not interfering, yet, Let's talk about a recurring question whispered through this uneasy piece. Where's the line? Where does cooperation become betrayal? How much accommodation is too much? These aren't questions that get answered at a lectern. They get answered in kitchens, in hushed whispers behind olive presses, in the eyes of children who learn Latin before they can fully pronounce their own blessings. Here's the mainstream fact. Herod the Great, Rome's chosen client king of Judea, took this ambiguity and turned it into a throne. Half Jewish, wholly ambitious, he rebuilt the Second Temple with stunning grandeur. Marble, gold, colonnades, an architectural marvel. You'd think this would be unifying. It wasn't, because while Herod's temple glittered, his methods darkened. He ruled with Roman backing. Yes, but also paranoia, cruelty, and the kind of lavish ego that makes you tear down homes just to build your own mausoleum. People cheered the finished temple, but muttered under their breath that it felt foreign. You pass near the temple courts again. The new stones gleam, almost too perfect. The old men who remember the last rebuilding squint at the new columns and whisper, "It's beautiful, but not ours." That same scratchy tunic you've been wearing? It feels just a little tighter. Here's your fringe detail. Some reports suggest Herod installed golden Roman eagles at the temple gates, symbols of imperial power. Whether he did it to please Caesar or just because he liked birds, it sparked fury. One group of students tore them down, sparking arrests and executions. Small symbols matter when the soul of a people is at stake. You climb a set of stone steps where teachers debate in the open. Some argue for accommodation. This is how we survive. Others push back. Faith diluted is faith lost. One rabbi quotes scripture. Another quotes Cicero. You sigh. The clash isn't swords anymore. It's syllables. Historians still argue whether Herod truly saw himself as Jewish or merely played the part for Rome. Some say he believed in what he built. Others call him a glorified middleman with a marble obsession. Either way, his legacy still towers over you, literally. You head to the outskirts of the city where traders camp. It's quieter here. Donkeys munch hay. Camels chew thoughtfully. A young girl hums while mending a tent flap. The air is cooler, with hints of cardamom and damp linen. You inhale deeply, trying to ground yourself. This is where the city's heartbeat feels older. You overhear whispers from travelers, stories of unrest bubbling in the countryside. Prophets with new teachings, messiahs in sandals, Roman patrols increasing, people trying to decide whether they're waiting for salvation or just for something different. One trader speaks of a teacher in Galilee who heals with his hands and speaks of the kingdom, not of Rome. Not of Herod, but something gentler, deeper. You lean in, but the conversation ends abruptly as a tax agent approaches. You nod to him politely. He doesn't nod back. Your legs are tired again. You sit near a fig tree, the leaves casting dappled shadows across your tunic. The figs are almost ripe. You pluck one and take a bite, sweet, soft, slightly bitter near the stem. You think of the older temple, the exile, the return, the scrolls, the gymnasiums, the eagles, the teachers, and you realize this isn't just a city. It's a memory made of stone, layered and layered again. And just as you lean back, eyes fluttering closed, a tremor of voices rises from the temple again. Not a riot, not yet, just the next debate in a city that never stops arguing with its past. You drift into the morning air like steam from a clay cup, slow, unfocused, weightless. The sun is barely up, and the streets are quiet except for the soft clatter of a broom across a stone threshold. You stretch beneath the fig tree where you slept, your spine stiff, your neck a bit damp. Someone's already begun baking flatbread. By the smell of it, and the scent winds through the alleyways like an invitation. But even in this moment of calm, the tension hasn't gone. It hums beneath everything, like a harp string stretched too tight. You walk through the city slowly, sandaled feet brushing centuries of dust. And you notice how everyone's eyes linger a second longer than usual on Roman armor, on shouting preachers, on unfamiliar faces. You hear them before you see them. A small group gathered outside the temple courts. Not a riot, not a protest, just men and women, heads bowed, listening to someone speak, not loudly, but with the kind of calm that commands attention. A teacher. He's seated on a large stone, one hand resting on his knee, the other gesturing gently. His voice doesn't rise, but the silence around him makes it powerful. You can't catch every word, but you hear phrases drift like petals on the breeze. Blessed are the peacemakers, the meek, the pure in heart. No call to arms, no politics, just stillness, wrapped in meaning. You sit down, legs crossed, letting the stone press against your ankles. The air smells of morning dust and something softer, maybe hope. For a moment, you forget Rome, you forget Persia, you forget temples and eagles and taxes. Just a man with words. And people listening. This moment won't last. Here's your mainstream fact. Around this time, Judea became a crucible of spiritual restlessness. Teachers, messianic figures, and rebels emerged from villages and wilderness alike, each claiming some vision of truth, of justice, of divine will. The Romans, famously unsentimental, began to take notice. Some movements were tolerated, some were crushed, but the line was never clear. A healing could be seen as a threat. A parable could be read as a challenge to Caesar. A sermon on a hillside could ripple through the empire like an earthquake made of whispers. Your quirky tidbit. Roman officials often misunderstood the very people they ruled. Some scholars believe they couldn't grasp Jewish monotheism at all. To them, worshipping only one invisible God seemed not devout but suspicious, like choosing not to pay your taxes just because you believe in honesty. It wasn't just foreign, it was defiant. You rise as the small gathering disperses, the teacher already walking away into the crowd like mist slipping between fingers. A Roman officer watches from across the square, arms crossed. He doesn't move, but you sense that someone, somewhere, is taking notes. You wander toward the temple again, past merchants opening their stalls, unrolling bolts of cloth, arranging baskets of dates and almonds. But even the marketplace chatter is quieter than usual. Something is shifting. You feel it in your chest, like the moment before a storm when the wind holds its breath. The temple guards look tense today. You pass beneath an archway where two priests argue over a ceremonial detail. Nearby, a scribe jots something down, glancing up only to scowl. It's not about religion anymore. It's about power. Who holds it? Who challenges it? And how long before someone swings a sword to settle the question? Historians still argue whether the Jewish religious leadership of the time was collaborating with Rome or simply surviving under it. Some view them as complicit. Others see them as trapped, trying to hold a community together without losing everything. You get the sense it's both. You climb the southern steps of the temple, each one polished by generations of sandals. You pause halfway, catching your breath. Your knees sting. Your back protests. It's not the climb, it's the weight of everything you've seen. Persia's memory, Greece's culture, Rome's grip, and now, fragile voices trying to bloom in the cracks. At the top, the air is thinner. You can see the whole city, still waking. The hills roll outward like waves frozen mid-break. Somewhere out there, more teachers walk, more listeners lean in, more soldiers take notes. This isn't a climax, it's a pressure cooker. And just as you turn to leave, you hear footsteps. Fast, urgent, a whisper. They arrested him. No one says who. No one needs to. You're walking fast now, not because you know where you're going, but because everyone else seems to. The air feels heavier, like the sky is pushing down just a little. You hear murmurs along the edges of the street, half sentences. Wide eyes, hands wringing robes in nervous little knots. Someone spits into the dust and mutters. They always arrest the quiet ones. You follow the flow of footsteps. Like leaves swept along a current you didn't choose. Somewhere up ahead, Roman armor glints in the early light. Just a flash, just enough to make your stomach sink. The city isn't screaming, not yet, but the silence is tense. Like the moment before a tear falls. You slip into a shaded alcove, watching as guards drag a man across the square. Not beaten, not bleeding, just tired, like someone who's walked too far on too little hope. The crowd is confused. Some shout, some cry, others stay silent, watching from windows, from rooftops, from between the pillars of the temple. You sense this isn't just a political arrest, it's a theological earthquake. This isn't the first time Rome has done this. Won't be the last, but it feels different, quieter, more intimate, somehow, like the city is holding its breath. Here's your mainstream fact. During this period, the Roman method of dealing with unrest in Judea was surgical. Arrest the leaders, disperse the followers, display strength just enough to avoid uprising, but not enough to make martyrs. Most problems could be solved with a crucifix and a warning sign. Very few people noticed when the crucified were nobodies. But some weren't nobodies. You walk back through the temple courtyard. It feels empty now, even though people are everywhere. Someone sings quietly, a hymn you don't recognize. You pass a woman holding a basket of doves. She's not moving, just staring at the ground like it's telling her something she doesn't want to hear. Here's a quirky footnote for your thoughts. Some early Roman officials reportedly mistook Jewish monotheism for atheism. One governor wrote home confused that this strange sect refused to offer incense to the emperor, not because they were rebels, but because they thought it was idolatry. The Romans were baffled. How do you control people whose ultimate loyalty is to a god you can't arrest? Historians still debate whether the local Jewish leadership cooperated willingly with Roman crackdowns, or whether they were just trying to keep a fragile peace. The reality, like your path through this city, is winding. It's easy to blame, harder to live through. You head toward a quiet garden. Gethsemane, they call it. The olive trees are gnarled and older than any building in Jerusalem. Their branches curl like fingers remembering something. You sit beside one, letting the rough bark press into your back. The ground here smells of oil, earth, and sorrow. Someone once wept here, not loudly, not dramatically, just wept, because he knew what was coming. Knew how easily crowds turn. How easily peace slips between the cracks of power. You think of all the times people believed peace was at hand, when Cyrus sent the exiles home, when Alexander spared the temple, when Herod rebuilt it in marble. Each time, the dream shimmered and then disappeared like breath on stone. And now, you don't know what's being lost. Not yet, only that it feels irreversible. Back in the city, the morning grows louder. Pots clatter. Merchants open stalls. The world moves forward like it doesn't notice something's about to change. Or maybe it notices, but doesn't want to admit it. That same scratchy tunic? It clings worse today, like it's warning you not to get too comfortable. You pass a group of Roman soldiers laughing, dice clacking in their hands. One rolls his eyes and says, "Another prophet." They never stop. You want to answer, but your tongue feels dry. And just as you turn toward the city gate, a friend of the arrested man is quietly slipping away. Not running, just walking, fast, head down, a betrayal still fresh on his breath. You walk out through the eastern gate just as the sun edges over the ridge. Pale and uncommitted, the sky is all soft peach and gray, colors that don't yet know what kind of day they want to become. The dust on the path outside the city sticks to your sandals, clings to your ankles, turns your thoughts heavy. The city behind you is already stirring louder. The trial is starting. Except, it's not really a trial. It's theater, a performance with outcomes already scribbled into the margins. The man they arrested? He'll be judged by people who have already decided what he is. And yet, the words from yesterday, those gentle blessings, linger in the back of your mind like the echo of a dream you're not ready to wake from. You follow the slope down toward a dusty hill. There's a crowd there, scattered loosely like wind-blown seeds. No shouting yet, just a quiet gathering of eyes and shoulders in confusion. At the top, 3 wooden posts stand tall against the sky. 2 of them already bear the slumped weight of men, hands bound. Breath shallow. The 3rd stands empty. For now, here's your mainstream fact. Crucifixion was a Roman invention of brutal precision, designed not just to kill, but to shame. It wasn't for elite rebels or dangerous philosophers. It was for nobodies, for slaves, for warnings, a public announcement nailed into flesh. This is what happens when you step out of line. But this time, the person stepping up to the cross isn't nobody. Not to this crowd, not to the murmuring elders or the women clutching scarves to their faces. Not to the people whose lives he healed with touch and word and silence. This time, it's different. You find a spot on a rocky ledge, legs curled beneath you. The wind brushes past like someone trying not to cry. You can smell the sharpness of iron, sweat, dust, a little vinegar. There's a Roman centurion at the base of the post, arms crossed, bored. You think about asking him if he knows what this means. But he's seen too many of these. They all blur. Now for your quirky detail. Some early records claim that when the sky darkened during a particular crucifixion, Roman sources, not Jewish ones, took note. One even wrote of a sudden eclipse or divine disturbance, though historians still debate whether this was celestial coincidence or creative editing. Either way, something felt off. Historians still argue whether this moment sparked the lasting rift between Rome and Judea, or simply accelerated what was always there. Some say this was the hinge upon which the entire historical relationship turned. Others say it was merely the first real crack in a dam already straining. You don't need a degree to know this moment has weight. You feel it in your chest, in your knees, in the way even the birds seem to pause. And then, it's over. No trumpet, no riot, just the quiet collapse of a breath. The sky doesn't fall, but it slouches. People begin to disperse, slowly, like water draining through a cracked basin. Some are crying, some look angry, others just look numb, like they've seen too much and understood too little. You remain seated on your ledge long after the crowd fades. The Roman guards talk quietly now, one pointing at the inscription nailed above the cross. King of the Jews, it says, in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin, 3 languages, 1 accusation. You wonder who chose the phrasing. You wonder if he laughed at it. You finally rise. Your legs are stiff, your thoughts heavier. You head back toward the city, passing a few people gathering near a tomb carved into rock. Someone has prepared linens. A woman holds a jar of spices. No one speaks. This isn't the end of the story, but it's the end of something. The city gate creaks shut behind you as you re-enter Jerusalem. The sun has climbed higher now, but everything still feels dim. People carry on, bakers bake, money changers haggle, Roman scribes file reports no one will read. And just as you find another quiet corner to rest, you hear someone say, they say the temple curtain tore. You look up, because if that's true, then maybe everything else is, too. You sit beneath a fig tree in the outer courts, watching sunlight spill over Jerusalem like a reluctant confession. The city doesn't look different, but it feels thinner, like the skin of something ancient has split open to reveal a new wound. People walk past you briskly, eyes forward, as if by not speaking of what happened, they can make it unhappen. A boy sweeps dust from the temple steps with too much force for someone his size. You see it in his jaw, the tension of someone who heard whispers he wasn't meant to understand. Someone mutters something about the curtain again. You still haven't seen it, But the rumor spreads like incense. The veil that once separated the holiest place from everything else, torn. Not unhooked, torn. You glance at the temple facade. Grand and still, but now it looks strange, like a lion made of paper. Your body feels heavy today, not just from exhaustion, but from the kind of quiet that sits in your chest and doesn't move. There's a breeze, but it doesn't cool you. It just reminds you how many things are still unsettled. This city's been ruled by priests, prophets, Persians, Greeks, and now Rome. But the real struggle? It's always been internal. The debates, the divisions, the constant clashing over who we are and what we're supposed to be. And now, as the scent of burial spices still lingers in your memory, the temple is once again at the center of it all. Mainstream fact for you: the Roman Empire, now deep into its administration of Judea, began tightening its grip after these events. The presence of charismatic figures, spiritual uprisings, and the murmurs of messiahship unsettled them. Rome was pragmatic, but it hated unpredictability, especially when it stirred religious fervor among a people already known for being famously hard to govern. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some Roman reports, scattered, rarely cited, describe unrest in Jerusalem not with words like revolt or rebellion, but madness, as if the Romans couldn't quite comprehend why theology could drive people to such passion. Why losing a teacher could shake a whole city's soul. Why the death of one man could split families, break traditions, light torches in alleyways, and scribble secret symbols on doorposts. Historians still argue whether the temple establishment's relationship with Rome was sincere or a slow dance of survival. Some argue the high priests had no choice. They were puppets caught between empire and zealotry. Others say they were complicit, hungry for stability more than truth. But you sense something deeper. That maybe even the priests were afraid. Afraid of what change might cost. Of what faith might demand if it stopped being convenient. You pass a row of shops. Closed today. The usual chatter has faded. One merchant sits on his stool, staring at nothing. A potter nearby shapes wet clay. His hands methodical, as if muscle memory can protect him from memory. And then you hear it, soft, urgent voices, from a house nearby, a door slightly ajar. You don't mean to eavesdrop, but the words catch you. He's gone. The stone is moved. Your chest tightens, not from fear, from something else, something you can't name yet. The temple guards are quieter now. Too, less posturing, more glancing over their shoulders. Like they know the story didn't end on the hill. Like they're waiting for someone to ask them questions they don't want to answer. You find your way toward the archives, an unassuming stone room filled with scrolls and wax tablets. The scribes there continue working, heads bowed, hands moving like clockwork, recording laws, taxes, tribal names. But on one desk, pushed halfway under a pile, is a fragment of a scroll, half finished. It starts with a genealogy. It ends with a phrase scratched out. You run your fingers along the edge of the scroll, and your skin tingles. Because the real story, the one about tension between Israel and every empire it's ever faced, was never just about power. It was about belief, and what happens when belief refuses to compromise. The sun is higher now. The city louder. Life continues. But something has changed. You can feel it in your bones. In the way people walk faster but look back more often. And just as you step out into the street again, you hear a voice behind you whisper. They say he's alive. You don't turn. You just keep walking. Because part of you already knows. Your feet find the edge of the city once more, where the stones give way to soil and the hills roll out like questions no one wants to answer. The path here is quieter. Fewer sandals, fewer soldiers. But the tension hasn't left, it just changed shape. It's in the air now. Like humidity before a thunderstorm. Invisible, heavy, inevitable. You sit by a small olive tree. The same kind that's been growing here since before Cyrus. Before Solomon, before anyone thought to build a temple, its bark is scarred, but it still produces fruit, small, bitter, resilient. You pluck one and taste it. Not pleasant, but honest. There's talk now, not just whispers, but actual conversation, about a movement rising. Something strange, something quiet, not the usual rebellion, not another armed uprising that Rome can stomp down with centurions and crosses. This feels slipperier, like trying to catch fog in your hands. You pass a group of travelers on the road. Their clothes are dusty, their eyes distant. One carries a scroll tucked under his arm. You catch a glimpse of Greek letters, something about good news. They speak in low tones, but you hear words like Messiah, forgiveness, kingdom, not Caesar's kingdom, not Herod's, something else. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the years following the crucifixion of Jesus, a new sect began to take shape, initially just a ripple within Judaism. A thread among many, but this thread refused to break. It wove itself into households, marketplaces, synagogues. It crossed borders. It was carried in the mouths of fishermen, tent makers, and former tax collectors. And eventually, Rome noticed. And your fringe detail, early followers of the Way, as they first called themselves, met in secret, but not always out of fear. Sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of intimacy. They broke bread in homes, sang hymns in alleys, baptized in borrowed rivers. Some Roman officials dismissed them as harmless mystics. Others were deeply unsettled by their refusal to swear loyalty to the emperor above all else. You lean against a stone wall on the side of the path, listening as one of these early teachers speaks to a small group. His voice is steady, and his words are strange, not fire and brimstone, not vengeance, but grace, mercy, love for enemies. It's so upside down it sounds almost rebellious. Historians still argue whether Rome's later persecutions were born of political fear or spiritual confusion. Was it the growth of the church that frightened the empire? Or was it the message that true power was not violence, but surrender? Not law, but love? You feel it now. This isn't about Persia anymore, or even Rome. This tension that's run through history, between empires and Israel, between control and covenant, between domination and devotion, it's taken a new form. It's no longer about land or gold or sacrifice. It's about stories, about what people believe is true. And the story now unfolding is dangerous in a different way. Because it isn't asking people to rise up, it's asking them to kneel. You rise and walk again, following a trail worn by sandals you'll never meet. Along the path, someone has carved a symbol into a stone, just a crude fish. You pause, trace it with your finger. It means something now. It means someone was here. Someone believed. Further down the road, a Roman messenger on horseback rides past. Dust flares up behind him. He barely glances at you. He's carrying news from the coast, perhaps about unrest. Perhaps about a man claiming to heal the sick in Cappadocia. Or a letter from someone named Paul. It's a strange feeling, walking beside an empire while another quietly grows beneath its feet. And just as the breeze picks up, stirring the olive branches like whispers from the past, you realize something. You've stopped wondering who won. Because in this long, tangled history between Persia, Israel, Greece, and Rome, maybe winning was never the point. Maybe surviving with your soul intact is the real revolution. You walk on, the dust of the ancient road clinging to your feet like an old habit. The sun sits higher now, warming your shoulders through that same scratchy tunic, though it's worn thinner in places. You're leaving Jerusalem behind for a moment, heading north along the trade roads that carry more than silk and grain. They carry ideas, slippery, slow-burning things that settle into minds and stay there longer than taxes or treaties. Today, the road hums with conversations that sound just a little too careful. Merchants whisper about new followers who won't swear oaths to Caesar. Scribes argue over whether the new scrolls being passed hand to hand should even count as scripture. Roman patrols grow thicker, not storming. Just watching. Always watching. Empires, after all, don't fear swords nearly as much as they fear songs. You rest by a well near a small village, its stone rim smoothed by centuries of hopeful hands. A woman draws water with the practiced ease of someone who's done it her whole life. She nods to you, then glances toward a nearby house where voices sing softly in the local tongue. Not temple music, not Roman chants, something else, something new. Here's your mainstream historical beat. After the crucifixion and rumored resurrection of Jesus, early Christians spread rapidly, first among Jewish communities, then across Gentile cities of the empire. Antioch, Ephesus, Corinth. The message was carried not by generals but by tentmakers and widows and once skeptical fishermen. It wasn't imposed by empire, but offered quietly like bread at the end of a long walk. But here's your quirky detail. Many early churches didn't call themselves churches. They were just gatherings, ecclesia, meaning an assembly, and sometimes they weren't even indoors. Some of the earliest known Christian graffiti was found in prison cells and baths. Scrawled fish, anchors, cryptic blessings. It turns out, if you want a message to last, write it in the places no one thinks to clean. Historians still debate whether the speed of Christianity's spread was due to its teachings, its structure, or the unique moment in Roman history. Some credit the Pax Romana, Rome's enforced peace and well-maintained roads, for allowing these ideas to travel far and fast. Others believe it was the sheer emotional gravity of the message, that love could triumph over power. That death didn't get the last word. You rise and walk again, passing through small towns where Hebrew, Greek, and Latin mingle like old friends who barely tolerate each other. And in each town, you see the same quiet shift. Fewer idols on doorways, more strangers meeting at dawn, more questions asked by the very people who used to answer them. And yet, the tension with Rome simmers. You pass a market stall where a Roman official inspects loaves of bread, asking questions in clipped Latin. The baker stammers, gestures toward a coin stamped with Caesar's face. The official frowns, shrugs, moves on, but you catch the look between the baker and his wife. The glance that says, "We're being watched." Again, even in these outer regions, Rome feels the vibration, like a bowl of wine disturbed by a distant drumbeat. At a nearby crossroads, a group of travelers debates over a letter they've received, something from a man named Paul. Urging gentleness, urging unity. You lean in just enough to hear phrases like grace and liberty. But they're delivered in tones full of tension. Not everyone agrees what these words mean. You rest beneath a sycamore tree as the wind picks up. It smells faintly of crushed thyme and old parchment. The branches creak, not like they're complaining, but like they're remembering something. You think of all the scrolls written, burned, rewritten, all the temples built and toppled. And still, people gather. Still, they hope. Still, they write their stories into the dust and dare to call it holy. You pass a boy drawing a fish into the dirt with a stick. He looks up at you and smiles, then quickly wipes it away. And just as the sky begins to dim, sun sliding behind a hill like a sigh, you reach a new town where a Roman edict is freshly nailed to the wall. Unregistered assemblies will not be tolerated. Any citizen harboring subversive texts is subject to punishment under law. But just beneath it, in a corner, someone has scratched a reply. The stone was rolled away. You touch it, you smile. The empire is still here. But so is the story. Night falls gently along the road, like a blanket laid down by someone who still cares. The stars begin to blink awake one by one, and you're grateful for the cooler air. Your legs are sore, your sandals are nearly paper, but something keeps you moving forward, something between curiosity and a quiet need to see how this all ends. Even though you know it doesn't. You pass under an old aqueduct. The arches overhead like ribs of a sleeping beast. Water trickles somewhere nearby, an ancient melody in a world full of noise. You're in a part of the empire where Roman columns rise alongside synagogues, where Latin scrolls are stored beside Hebrew ones, and where the cracks between cultures grow just wide enough for something new to grow. In a small stone courtyard, lit by oil lamps, you find another gathering, not large, maybe 10 or 15 people, seated on woven mats, passing bread and dates between them. There's no sermon, just a reading, a letter. Likely, you recognize some words. Love is patient, love is kind. It's strangely quiet for a revolution. Here's your mainstream historical moment. By the 1st and 2nd centuries, Christian communities had spread throughout the eastern Mediterranean, each shaped by local flavor but tethered by shared letters, shared stories, and a strange refusal to let fear control them. They didn't worship in temples or build monuments, yet they met in homes, in catacombs, in courtyards like this. And here's a tender fringe fact. Some early Roman officials complained that Christians would not stop singing in the night. Not songs of rebellion, not chants, hymns, soft, persistent melodies in the dark, as if hope had lungs and couldn't stay quiet. You sit a while, not intruding, just watching. Someone offers you bread. It's coarse, but warm. You break it gently. It tastes like what you imagine truth would. If it came in loaf form, simple, filling, slightly strange at first. There are no icons here, no altars, just people, just the story. But even this peaceful gathering carries weight. The empire is noticing, and not fondly. You walk on and pass a villa with high iron gates. Through the slats, you hear the sharp voice of a Roman magistrate complaining about this Eastern superstition that poisons loyalty. He's pacing. He doesn't see you. You keep walking, heart slow and heavy, because you know where this leads. Persecution doesn't usually come all at once. It creeps in. A merchant loses business for refusing to burn incense to Caesar. A child is mocked for not joining in Roman festivals. A midwife disappears after being accused of meeting with those people. The pain isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet, administrative, legal, inevitable. Historians still debate whether early Christian persecution was systematic or sporadic. Some say it was limited to a few emperors. Others point out that even isolated punishments shaped a culture of resilience and defiance. You can't build catacombs unless you know someone's coming for you. And yet, the gatherings continued. The stories were passed like heirlooms. And the song in the night? It never stopped. You pass through another village, where a shepherd sings softly to his flock. It's not a hymn, but the cadence reminds you of what you heard back in the courtyard. You wonder if he knows the story, if he's heard about the stone that rolled away, if he's afraid. You stop by a well, your reflection blurry in the moonlit water. You look older now, dustier, wiser, maybe, or just more tired. And as you rest, a woman sits beside you. Her hands are calloused, her robe is plain. She doesn't speak, but she hums just a few notes of the same song you heard earlier. You don't ask her name. She doesn't ask yours. Because somehow, you both already know you're following the same story. And just as the wind picks up, carrying dust and starlight across the hills, a Roman patrol passes in the distance. Torches lit, faces hard, but the woman keeps humming. And you don't feel afraid. Dawn again. You've lost count of how many times the sky has turned pink over these roads. How many fig trees you've passed. How many stones you've kicked absent-mindedly while trying to piece together 1,000 years of tension that never quite breaks and never quite resolves. Today, the road winds toward a port city, Caesarea Maritima, built by Herod, polished by Rome, and now buzzing with voices in at least 4 languages. Waves lap against the harbor wall. lazy and indifferent. Fishermen haul nets with the practiced rhythm of people who understand time differently. You inhale the salt air, tinged with tar and rotting fish, and remind yourself, this is where the empire meets the sea. This is where stories go to find ships. The city is loud. Roman architecture rises like it's trying to impress someone. The amphitheater gleams. The aqueduct cuts a proud silhouette against the hills. And yet, tucked in corners, behind olive crates and under canvas awnings, quiet conversations still bloom. You slip into one of those corners, where a man with a trimmed beard and parchment-stained fingers teaches a small group of listeners. His voice is calm but carries weight. He's not preaching. He's explaining about a man named Peter, a vision on a rooftop, a conversation with a Roman centurion. You catch the word inclusion, and then, unclean made clean. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the early growth of Christianity, Caesarea was a key crossroads, both geographically and spiritually. It was here, according to Acts, that Peter met Cornelius, a Roman soldier. This encounter marked a major turning point, the moment when the Jesus movement extended explicitly to non-Jews. It shook assumptions. It rewrote rules. And your fringe detail? Some records suggest that Roman converts like Cornelius were confused at first, not by the theology, but by the lack of visual deity. No statues, no temples, yet, just stories, bread, wine, and a quiet boldness that seemed to say, you don't need a golden idol to be close to the divine. You pass a bakery, where two women debate whether to give leftover bread to a traveler they suspect is one of them. One says it's dangerous, the other shrugs and says, he might be an angel, or just hungry. That's the thing about this movement, it blurs the line between sacred and ordinary, between neighbor and enemy, between where Rome ends and something else begins. Historians still argue whether the Jesus movement survived because of its adaptability or because of its refusal to adapt. Some say it succeeded because it translated itself into Greek thought, Roman law, and common customs. Others say it endured because it refused to be diluted, even when it cost lives. You walk down to the harbor. Sailors load amphorae onto a merchant ship. One crate slips, crashes to the dock, olive oil spills in a slow, golden puddle. The ship's captain swears in 3 languages and then mutters something about gods not listening. You hear a dockhand reply, maybe try the one who walks on water. You smile without meaning to. You sit at the edge of the pier, feet dangling over the side. A group of children chases gulls in a circle, shrieking with joy. One of them trips, falls, laughs anyway. You watch them and think about how many empires have risen with banners and laws and perfect architecture, and how many have crumbled because they couldn't account for a child's laughter or a broken loaf shared in faith. Further along the coast, a small house with an open courtyard glows with morning light. Inside, someone's reading aloud from a scroll. Not Hebrew, not Latin, but something in between. Words like grace, gift, body. Someone else translates softly for the older listeners. You recognize the rhythm, one of Paul's letters. Perhaps, a sentence about being neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. You feel the sentence settle into your spine like an anchor made of gentleness. And just as the sea breeze begins to lift the edge of your tunic, you notice something small near your feet, a scrap of linen, likely torn from someone's satchel. Someone has written on it in a shaky hand, the kingdom is not in temples, but in hearts. You fold it carefully, place it in your pouch, because even when the road ends at the sea, the story finds another way forward. The road curves inland again, away from the scent of salt and the cry of gulls. Your feet move slower today, not from pain, exactly, but from that strange sensation of walking through something unfinished. You've followed prophets and kings, empires and scribes. You've stood beneath Persian columns, listened in the shadows of Roman arches. And now, As you climb a gentle slope lined with pale-leafed olive trees, you begin to sense something else rising on the horizon. Not another empire. A question. Up ahead, a cluster of small homes spreads across the hills like scattered stones from a sling. This isn't Jerusalem. This isn't Rome. This is somewhere in between, physically and spiritually. You hear children laughing as they chase a goat too small to care. A woman hums as she hangs linens to dry. And near the well, a group of men and women gather around a low table. Not to debate or accuse, but simply to listen. A man sits at the center, shoulders hunched forward, scroll opened gently in his lap. He speaks in Greek, with a Hebrew accent, pausing often, not because he forgets his words, but because the words matter. You slip into the back of the group. The stone beneath you warm from the sun. He's reading a letter, not a law, not a curse, a letter. Words like faith, unity, suffering, and hope drift over the group like dust settling on oil. No one interrupts, no one argues. It feels different, like you've stumbled into the beginning of something that hasn't decided what it will become, but already knows it's real. Here's your mainstream historical anchor. In the years following the death and claimed resurrection of Jesus, his followers, Jewish and Gentile alike, began forming more structured communities across the Roman world. These weren't large organizations. They were households, kitchens, rooftops, spaces borrowed from tradesmen, teachers, tent makers, and through these spaces, letters began to circulate, Pauline epistles, the first gospels, teachings, encouragements, the foundation of what would, centuries later, be called the New Testament. And yet, back then, it was fragile, disjointed, handmade. Your feet ache, you shift slightly, and someone offers you a flat piece of bread and a pinch of dried figs. You accept, you chew slowly, thoughtfully, as the speaker continues, and so neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, will be able to separate us from the love of God. You feel the words land like a warm cloth across tired shoulders. Now your quirky footnote. Some Roman officials, tasked with tracking these early gatherings, found their methods maddening. The followers of Jesus didn't hold fixed rituals. They didn't worship in official temples. They had no central leader, no anthem, no uniform. One letter home from a confused governor even admitted, "I cannot determine if they are seditious or simply stubborn." And so Rome, ever practical, began to treat them as both. Historians still argue whether the Christians' refusal to participate in Roman civic religion was truly rebellious or simply misunderstood. After all, to Rome, worshipping the emperor wasn't a big deal, it was civic etiquette. Like paying a toll, like showing up to vote. But to early Christians, this wasn't just ritual, it was idolatry, and they refused, softly, calmly, completely. You follow the group as it disperses after the reading. Some return to farming, others to weaving. A few stay behind to ask the teacher questions, one of them with tears in their eyes. You don't hear the conversation, but the teacher places a gentle hand on their shoulder, and the silence that follows says more than words. You wander down a dirt path, passing vineyards striped across the hills. A shepherd waves to you, and you wave back. Further down, a boy is carving a fish symbol into a fence post. He looks up, grins, and then erases it with the flat of his palm. You wonder how many signs like that you've missed. How many messages are hiding in plain sight. You reach a town square, not bustling, but not empty. A Roman edict is posted near the well. No gatherings without imperial permit. You glance at it, and then at the children playing just beneath it, giggling, chasing each other in lazy circles. One of them bumps the wall, and the scroll flutters slightly, held only by one nail. It might fall, it might not. You keep walking. Inside a nearby home, another meeting is beginning. Candles flicker, scrolls are unrolled. A woman leads this one. She speaks softly but firmly. And her words carry authority born not of title but of trial. You catch a phrase. We have this treasure in jars of clay. And again, you feel it. That quiet brilliance of people who have nothing and yet carry everything. You take a seat near the doorway. Your knees groan. The stone is cold. Someone hands you a cup of water. The room smells like olive oil and candle wax and something else, maybe trust. Maybe something older than trust. The conversation shifts to persecution. One man has lost his work for refusing to participate in a local Roman festival. Another was denied trade rights. A third's cousin was imprisoned for publicly reading one of Paul's letters. No one cries. No one shouts. They nod. They pray. And yet, here's the twist, there's joy. Not loud, not manic, but deep, like a root that can't be reached from the surface. Historians still puzzle over this part. How did a movement born in occupied territory, led by an executed man, with no political power, no military, no funding, and no nation, survive? More than survive, grow, flourish, shift the moral structure of the most powerful empire in the world. You leave the house slowly, stepping into the cool twilight. The stars are out again. Quiet and impartial, you sit on a low wall, staring up. Somewhere far from here, another group is gathering. Another scroll is being opened. Another letter is arriving by dusty messenger. The temple in Jerusalem still stands, for now. But even its walls can feel the tension. The priests argue quietly. Rome tightens its grip. And somewhere in the distance, whispers grow into names. And names into stories. And stories into movement. And just as your eyes begin to close, you hear the first few notes of a hymn rising from that candle at home. Not defiance. Not mourning. Just the kind of song that only people who believe in something stronger than fear can sing. You wake with your back against cool stone and a neck stiff from dreams too large for the body they borrowed. The stars are fading now, drawn back into the sky's hidden pocket as dawn spreads slowly over the hills. You blink the sleep from your eyes and realize that something about the silence has changed. It's not peace. It's anticipation. The streets around you stir before the sun does. You hear hushed voices, merchants preparing carts, women gathering water, a Roman patrol checking equipment with the precision of people who know something's coming. And that's when you see it, another edict. Fresh and sharp-edged, nailed to the synagogue door like a warning dressed as formality. Any teachings contradicting the religious customs of the empire shall be investigated, detained, and if necessary, removed. Your heart tightens. The empire is tired of patience. You walk toward the square, past traders arranging jars of lentils and linen. But no one meets your eyes. Not even the boy who carved the fish symbol yesterday. The symbol's gone now. The fence is clean. This is the beginning of official persecution. Here's your mainstream historical beat. Under Emperor Nero, particularly after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, Christians were blamed, hunted, and executed with theatrical cruelty. Some were sewn into animal skins and torn by dogs. Others were burned as human torches to light Nero's gardens. These weren't executions. They were statements. And the statement was, don't believe anything we don't control. But that was Rome. Here in Judea, the pressure felt different. Not spectacle, surveillance, quiet arrests, secret trials, community leaders disappearing without record. The kind of fear that makes people stop singing in public. And now, your fringe detail. Early Christian gatherings began developing coded greetings. Phrases like, the peace of the Lord be with you, were more than religious sentiment. They were tests. Are you one of us? Do you know the story? Can I trust you? You walk into a home you've passed before, one with an old olive press out front and a vine that grows sideways across the roof. The faces inside are familiar now. The scrolls are out, but this time, no one's reading aloud. They speak in whispers, sharing rumors, They raided the house by the river. Lysander was taken. No one's heard since. They're burning letters now, and yet no one leaves. They share bread. They share water. One woman brings in oil to anoint the forehead of a frightened boy. He cries a little, not because he's hurt, but because he understands. This isn't just a story anymore. It's his story. Historians still argue how coordinated these early persecutions were. Some suggest they were sporadic, driven by local authorities or jealous rivals. Others insist there was an emerging pattern, one that targeted community, erased memory, and tried to silence witness. But what Rome didn't understand was this: you can burn a scroll, but you can't unteach a parable. You can crush a meeting, but you can't erase the memory of shared bread, a healing hand, or a body broken for others. And the more the empire pressed, the deeper the movement burrowed. You leave the house just before sunrise breaks over the rooftops. The streets glow softly. Your footsteps echo. You make your way to the outskirts where another group is gathering, not in a home this time, but in the catacombs. They say these underground tombs are where death lives. But down here, you hear singing. Not loud, just enough to bounce off the damp stone. Just enough to remind each other, we're still here. You descend slowly, your hand brushing rough walls carved with names, fish symbols, doves. At a bend, someone hands you a small oil lamp. The flame flickers. The light is weak, but still stronger than the dark. There are maybe 30 people gathered here. Some wear fine clothes, others rags. A few are children. A man in the back is missing a leg. A woman near the front holds a scroll so tightly you wonder if she remembers it's just parchment. One of the elders speaks, not loudly, not formally. He doesn't raise his voice. He raises memory. He reminds them of the Beatitudes, of the Last Supper, of Paul's letters from prison. He tells them that suffering is not new, that empires rise and fall, but truth endures like a vine finding cracks in marble. He says, they may silence us, but they cannot stop the resurrection. You look around the room and see nodding heads, closed eyes, tears, smiles. It's not delusion, it's devotion. You sit for a long time after the meeting ends, tracing your fingers across a carved fish in the wall. You wonder how many people touched it before you, how many passed through here, afraid, but not alone. When you finally climb back out, blinking into the sunlight, the city looks the same. The market opens, the guards stand at their posts, but the ground beneath your feet feels different. Because you know now, the empire is trying to choke the roots of something that grows underground. And roots, when stepped on, do not die, they deepen. You walk toward the hills again, feet tired, heart steady. The wind picks up and carries a voice from somewhere behind you. It says only this: the tomb is still empty. And that, somehow, is enough to keep going. You take the long road now, winding through the countryside where the land softens into wheat fields and wildflowers. Far from the stone-weighted cities and suspicious Roman glances. But don't let the scenery fool you. Just because there are no walls here doesn't mean there aren't borders. Some of the most important lines in this story were never drawn in ink or carved into stone. They were invisible, cultural, spiritual, deeply personal, and yet, the people walking this road with you feel those lines with every step. You pass a caravan of traders, donkeys braying, jars clinking, voices calling out in 3 languages. One of them wears a symbol you recognize now, a tiny scratched fish on a cord around his neck. He doesn't meet your eye, but he does nod, just once, just enough. Because out here, in these fields, where laws don't echo off marble halls and no centurion patrols the dust, a different kind of tension exists. Not empire versus nation, but identity versus assimilation. Here's your mainstream anchor. After Christianity's slow but steady spread across Judea and the Roman East, it began to grow in urban centers across Asia Minor, North Africa, and eventually into Western Europe. But with that expansion came a new challenge. How much could this young faith bend to local customs without breaking? Some believers argued for preserving Jewish practices, circumcision, dietary laws, Sabbath traditions. Others, especially among the Gentile converts, leaned into a more universal message, one that didn't require you to become culturally Jewish in order to follow Christ. This wasn't a theological footnote. It was a full-blown argument. You pause at a small way station where a fire crackles in a pit, and two travelers argue about this very thing over bread and lentils. Faith alone, says one, his voice clipped and confident, but not without obedience. The other counters, eyes narrowed. Their words don't sound angry. They sound old, rehearsed, as if this debate has traveled farther than they have. And indeed, historians still argue whether the early faith communities fractured from within or simply evolved through disagreement. The Council of Jerusalem, as it came to be called later, attempted to settle this, allowing Gentile converts into the fold without requiring full adherence to Jewish law. But in practice, the debates continued for generations. Here's your fringe detail. In some remote Christian sects, believers invented their own hybrid customs, mixing Torah observance with teachings of Jesus in beautifully strange ways. They celebrated Jewish festivals with Christian meanings. One group insisted on eating unleavened bread at every meal to symbolize continual readiness for redemption. Another baptized themselves every morning as a daily renewal. It was chaotic, it was sincere, and it made defining Christianity far more difficult than you might think. You keep walking, the road narrowing between two hills. In the valley, a small cluster of homes sits in the crook of the land. Shaped like a cupped hand holding something fragile. You enter quietly, no banners, no creeds on the walls. Just people gathered around a table. The meal is already in progress, simple food, quiet conversation, prayers woven into each bite. One woman gestures for you to sit. She has the look of someone who's lost much, but still carries peace like a hidden ember in her chest. She offers you water, then leans in and says, "We meet here because they don't know this house belongs to believers." The statement is matter of fact, not fearful, not angry, just true. Inside the house, scrolls are wrapped in linen and kept in clay jars, some copied by hand from letters passed down by travelers. Others filled with psalms annotated in the margins. There's a faint scent of olive oil and candle smoke. The floor is swept. The air feels like waiting. You sit beside an old man who quietly begins to teach, not from scripture, but from memory. He speaks of invisible borders, the kind that define who belongs, who doesn't, and what it costs to cross those lines. He tells the story of a Roman convert who was rejected by a Jewish Christian elder until that elder, in a dream, saw himself outside the very kingdom he thought he had mastered. The dream ended with a gate opening not to let someone in, but to let him back in. You feel that dream settle on your shoulders like a wool shawl. Heavy, warming. Outside, the sound of hooves stirs the gathering. People go quiet. The old man rolls up the scroll. Someone gently hides the bread under a cloth. You all sit still as the Roman patrol rides past, uninterested. For now. But this is the nature of invisible borders. They shift. They blur. And sometimes, they disappear when no one is looking. You leave after sunset. The hills turning purple in the fading light. The air smells of time and smoke and distant rain. And as you climb, you think of all the lines that have divided people in this story, from empire to empire. Law to grace, ritual to freedom, and you think of the ones who chose to step over those lines anyway. Not with swords, but with scrolls, with stories, with love written in ink and in blood. Just as the stars emerge again, you pass a stone milestone on the road, weathered beyond reading, but someone has carved beneath it, in small crude letters, no longer Jew nor Gentile. You pause, you touch it, And in the quiet, you whisper back, just one body, just one story. The path flattens as you reach the edge of a bustling crossroad, two rutted trade routes intersecting like threads pulled too tight. The noise greets you before the people do. Donkeys braying, clay pots clinking, conversations in three languages colliding midair. But beneath it all, you catch the low hum of negotiation. Not the loud kind, with raised voices and flailing arms, but the quieter, more dangerous kind. The kind carried by whispers, by coin exchanges, and by the unsaid. This is not Jerusalem, not Antioch, just a market town caught between east and west, where ideas move faster than soldiers. You find a shaded spot beneath a patched canvas awning. The merchant next to you sells incense, but not just for rituals. He winks and tells you it keeps the neighbors calm. You smile politely, but your eyes drift toward a nearby cart where a man in simple robes is unrolling a tightly bound scroll. No stall sign, no pulpit, just a scroll and a story. He begins to speak, not loudly, not formally. His words flow like oil over dry wood. You recognize the cadence. Another letter. Possibly from Paul, possibly a copy of a copy. The merchant snorts. The woman beside him stops stitching to listen. Even the donkey seems to pause. Ears perked. There is no fear in love. But perfect love drives out fear. The scroll man doesn't announce his faith. He doesn't need to. The words speak for him. Here's your mainstream historical thread. As Christianity spread, its earliest evangelists used the Roman trade routes to carry their message. These weren't missionaries with salaries and banners. They were tent makers, weavers, traveling widows, and sailors who carried copies of letters in their satchels. Sometimes they preached. More often, they listened. But ideas aren't traded like spices. They're carried like rumors. And when you tell a story that offers hope without violence, dignity without conquest, it spreads faster than Rome can stamp it out. Your quirky historical detail? In some Roman provinces, informants were paid to report Christians not for worshipping illegally, but for disrupting local economies. Converts stopped buying idols. They stopped offering at civic festivals. They stopped visiting certain bathhouses and theaters. One city reportedly held a forum to address the Christian influence on local morale and trade. Imagine being accused of killing the market by loving your neighbor too much. You rise and continue through the town, feet aching, but heart calm. There's something about the way people gather around the scroll reader. No force, no ceremony, just hunger for meaning, for something Rome's roads can't deliver. You pass by a group of traders gathered near a well. They're speaking in hushed tones about a traveler from Thessalonica who claims he saw a man healed from blindness, not by spell or ritual, but by prayer alone. One of them scoffs. Another crosses himself quietly. And above it all, the scroll reader continues. This time he speaks of freedom, not from Rome, but from fear, from death, from the heavy yoke of trying to earn your worth. You pause beneath a fig tree whose leaves shimmer in the wind like pages fluttering in a draft. Someone's etched something into the bark. Grace travels faster than war. You run your fingers over the carving. It's barely noticeable, almost erased by time, but it holds. Like most of this story, historians still debate whether Christianity succeeded because of its social message, its promises of afterlife, or its radical inclusivity. Some say it gave slaves and women dignity in a world that offered little. Others argue it co-opted just enough of Roman order to feel familiar, while still offering something deeply new. But what's clear is this: it met people not in palaces, but in crossroads like this. You sit to rest and watch as the scroll man finishes, rolls his parchment tight, ties it with a leather cord. A boy asks where the story came from. The man smiles. A letter from a man in chains. The boy frowns. A prisoner? The man nods. Free in all the ways that matter. You think about that as the crowd disperses. How a letter written in chains can set others free. How a man executed as a criminal can be remembered as a king. You pass a pottery shop where a woman has painted the inside of a clay bowl with a fish symbol. She stacks it quietly with the others. Not for sale. Just there. A message, or maybe just a prayer, baked into the glaze. And just as you begin to leave the market, you overhear a final conversation. Two traders, both gray-bearded and road-worn, arguing about whether to take the longer route to avoid a Roman checkpoint. They're questioning anyone with scrolls. One says, "Then I'll carry mine anyway." The other replies, "Even if they burn it?" The man shrugs. "It's already in my mouth." You smile, because you understand now, these letters, these gatherings, these whispered stories on dusty roads, they don't need temples. They don't need armies. They just need someone who won't stop speaking. And that, Rome has never quite known how to silence. The sun hangs low over the horizon, flattening the landscape into golden silence. You walk slowly now, not because you're tired, though you are, but because the road ahead begins to feel more sacred than practical. It's no longer just about arriving. It's about remembering. Remembering why you started this journey. Why these stories cling to stones and shadows like old moss. Why certain places vibrate with meaning, even when the tourists haven't found them yet. And one of those places stands just ahead. It's not marked on any imperial map. It's not guarded or taxed or made into a monument. It's just a simple rise of land, half hidden by a grove of wind-bent cypress trees. A circle of stones rests at the top, arranged not for defense, but for reverence. No signs, no plaques, just space. You step into the clearing and hear nothing but the wind, and your own breath, and maybe, if you let your heart slow down, the hum of memory. Because this was one of the places they gathered. The early followers, the ones who had no cathedrals, no pulpits, no choir robes, just a name, just a story, just bread, wine, and the willingness to be seen. You sit on a flat stone, warmed by the day's last light, and think about sacred spaces, places where memory and meaning overlap. For the Israelites, it was the Temple Mount. For the Persians, the Fire Temple. For the Greeks, Delphi. For Rome, the Forum. But for the early Christians? Sometimes it was a dinner table. Sometimes a prison cell. Sometimes a hillside. Sacred didn't need stone, it needed presence. Here's your mainstream fact. As Christianity grew, still illegal, still underground, its members began to mark spaces not with statues or banners, but with stories. This was the house where Lydia met Paul. That was the room where the letter to the Ephesians was first read. Here, a brother was arrested but kept singing. The landscape became a scripture of its own. Your fringe fact? In many places where Christians once met, later generations built churches, not always to commemorate the location, but to protect it. Sometimes the memory came first, and the architecture followed. In one fishing village on the Aegean coast, oral tradition says believers met inside a dry cistern, their songs echoing upward like water rising from stone. That cistern became a chapel, but only after the songs stopped being illegal. You walk down from the hill just as dusk spills across the road like spilled wine. Back into the town, back into the world. The streets are quiet, but not empty. A woman carries a basket of loaves. A boy leads a blind man carefully over uneven stones. The bakery window flickers with a single lamp. It all feels reverent, even in its ordinariness. You pass the threshold of a modest home where voices are speaking softly. Not in Latin, not in Greek, but in a patchwork of dialects, phrases stitched together with hope and repetition. They're reading from a worn scroll. The speaker's voice shakes, not from fear, but from weight, as if the words are heavier than parchment. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. You pause outside, one foot on the step. You don't knock, you just listen. You hear the rhythm, the pauses, the prayerful silences, and then, A moment of stillness so complete. You swear you hear someone weep. And then someone sings. Not loud, not in harmony. Just one voice. Dry and cracked. Carrying a tune that barely holds together. But others join. One by one. The notes brush against the walls like moth wings. Incoordinated and holy. And here it is again. That invisible thing you keep finding. That sense of sacred not tied to place. But to presence. Not guarded by empire. But offered by community. Not made of marble. But of memory. You sit just outside their doorway. Under a fig tree. The same kind of tree you've passed 100 times. The air smells of dust and oil and the sweet decay of summer fruit. You tilt your head back and stare at the sky. And then comes the line that still makes scholars argue. Upon this rock, I will build my church. Was it metaphor? Was it literal? Was it a name? A person? An idea? Historians still debate. Some say it refers to Peter. Others say it refers to faith itself. Still others point out that the word, church, didn't even mean building for centuries. It meant people, called out, gathered, open-handed. You rise slowly. Your joints resist, but your heart feels steadier than it did this morning. You walk back through the now sleeping streets, past shuttered windows and flickering lamps. A dog barks once and then stops, like it thought better of drawing attention. You reach a crossroads, the same one you stood at days ago. But now, something's different. You know the path. You've heard the story. You've carried the scroll in your heart. And just before you turn toward the next town, you pass a low wall. Someone has scratched into the stone. Sacred is wherever love takes root. You run your fingers along it. You smile. Because by now, you understand. The temple is no longer in Jerusalem. The fire is no longer in Persia. The gods are no longer in Rome. And yet, the sacred still burns. In scrolls, in song, in bread, in you. The road narrows once more as it weaves through a rocky pass. Shaded by leaning cliffs and wild shrubs clinging to cracks like small acts of defiance. You walk slowly, the light dimmer here, your feet brushing loose gravel that makes a soft hush with every step. The farther you walk, the quieter the world becomes, until all you can hear is the wind breathing through stone and your own heartbeat. Steady and determined, you're not lost, not anymore, but you are between what was and what might be, between empire and memory, between a faith that once whispered in catacombs and one that will soon rise in basilicas. This place, this moment, is a liminal space. And it's here, in this silence, that you find the scroll. It's wedged into a dry crack in the rock, protected by a scrap of cloth and a few smooth stones. Hidden, forgotten, preserved, you kneel slowly, your knees popping with the effort, and carefully unwrap the layers. The parchment is brittle, but still legible. The ink has faded, but the hand is sure. It's a letter, not one of Paul's, not from Peter, something more local, a copy of a copy. You recognize the cadence of those who survived persecution, not with swords, but with sentences. You read aloud to yourself. Softly. Let no fear settle into your bones. What the world breaks, God remembers. You fold it again with care, tucking it into your satchel. You don't know who wrote it, but it was written for someone like you. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Long before Constantine legalized Christianity in the 4th century, communities were preserving teachings, letters, and oral traditions in caves, homes, even burial grounds. These early writings, often unsigned, often anonymous, weren't meant to impress. They were meant to last. They weren't written for kings. They were written for survivors. And here's your fringe detail. In the Judean desert near Qumran, scholars found hundreds of ancient scrolls in jars, some biblical, some sectarian, some still being translated. Among them were fragments of prayers written in times of persecution, lamenting the destruction of temples, asking whether God had turned away. One fragment, unsigned, contains the line, "We still light lamps, though we have no roof." You walk again, scroll secure, back into sunlight. The path widens as it descends toward a town on the plain. You pass olive trees bent by centuries of wind. You pass a shepherd who nods without speaking. And you enter the town without fanfare. No gates, no guards, just clay homes and the scent of cooking lentils. Inside a home, you're welcomed, quietly, naturally. The hosts know why you've come, not because you said anything, but because your face carries that familiar look. The look of someone who's been traveling with sacred words stitched into their breath. Tonight, the gathering is small. No sermon, no ritual, just bread, oil, a retelling of a parable about seeds and soil. And then silence, not fearful, but full. And afterward, as the others drift to sleep, you sit by the fire with one of the elders. He's thin, eyes bright behind tired lids. He tells you about the time before Rome noticed them, when gatherings were easy, when the stories still felt like rumors. You ask him how they kept going. He says, "We didn't, the story did." Historians still argue whether early Christianity succeeded because of divine intervention, cultural readiness, or socio-political collapse. But the people you've met, farmers, weavers, widows, letter carriers, they don't talk about strategy. They talk about faith, about memory, about a body broken and a stone rolled away. You step outside the house as night falls. The air is soft. A dog howls in the distance, answered by another. And above you, the stars are sharper than you remember, like they've been honed by years of watching. You sit beneath an almond tree. A child climbs into your lap without asking, curls against you, and falls asleep. You don't move. And in this moment, you realize something. Empires are loud. They build roads, print laws, carve statues, crush rebellion, and demand loyalty. But the sacred? It whispers. It walks. It carries water. It shares bread. It survives not by force, but by memory passed in secret, like light cupped in trembling hands. Just before you fall asleep, you hear someone whisper a line you've heard before, but it feels new again. Where 2 or 3 are gathered. You close your eyes. The story is still gathering. Morning returns with a hush rather than a fanfare. The town around you wakes slowly, shutters creak open. Goats nudge each other out of sleep, and the first curls of smoke rise from cooking fires. You open your eyes beneath the almond tree and stretch your arms gently, careful not to disturb the child still asleep beside you. Someone places a warm cup of barley tea in your hands without a word. This is how sacred things move now, not in grand declarations, but in gestures, in hospitality, in warmth. The empire still rules, still taxes, still marches and measures, but beneath that noise, something quieter has already taken root. You rise, slowly, the child now bundled in a shawl beside his mother. The elder from the fire last night stands in the doorway, watching the sky, as if reading the wind. He nods to you, and in that nod, you sense the entire story, that he has carried it as long as he's had memory. And now it's yours to carry too. Today is your final walk. You leave the town behind, feet tracing familiar dust, path worn by sandals far older than yours. There's a weight in your satchel, not just the scrolls, but the meaning they hold. They've been smuggled, copied, whispered, memorized. They've outlived governors and generals. And they'll outlive more, because the empire is no longer growing. It's managing, struggling. The cracks have begun to show. Here's your mainstream fact. By the early 4th century, Christianity had become too widespread to ignore. Persecution had failed to extinguish it. In 313 CE, the Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity. A few decades later, it would become the dominant religion of the Roman Empire. The persecuted became protected. The whispers became choirs. But here's your fringe detail. Many of the early followers who had risked their lives for faith didn't celebrate this shift. Some even grieved it. They feared that with legality would come dilution. That once the church stepped into marble halls, it might leave behind the homes, the catacombs, the broken bread passed hand to hand by candlelight. You reach a rise in the road and look back at the valley behind you. The sun now glints off tiled roofs and the occasional Roman column. But your eyes are drawn not to the buildings, but to the gathering spaces, the small porches, the garden corners, the courtyards where the sacred still feels like breath. You continue walking, and at the edge of the next village, a man greets you with a smile and 3 words. Peace be with you. You return the phrase without thinking. And in that moment, you both know, you're part of the same body now. The same story. He hands you a folded parchment, worn soft by many fingers. On it is a prayer, written simply. You tuck it away, add it to the others. Another verse in the living scripture of a faith that has always traveled. You sit by a fountain in the village square and eat dates offered by a stranger. The water trickles gently. A child nearby sings a line of a hymn. It's out of tune. It's perfect. You think back over everything you've seen. You've walked the cracked earth between Persia and Israel, passed under the carved stone lions of Persepolis, wandered Jerusalem's sacred dust. You've heard prophets whisper, soldiers shout, scribes argue. You've tasted the sour figs of exile and the warm bread of secret gatherings. You've watched empires rise in gold and fall in smoke. And through it all, through Babylon, through Persia, through Greece and Rome, you followed a thread. It wasn't embroidered. It was stitched into skin. It was carried in broken bodies and stubborn hope. It passed from mother to child, from teacher to student, from scroll to voice to memory. Historians still argue about what Christianity became. A religion, a revolution, a paradox, certainly, one that taught the last would be first. The poor would inherit the kingdom, and that enemies should be loved. One that said a crucified man could be a king. And not just a king, the king. You walk one last time, following a road lined with olive trees. You pass ruins now, Roman ones, arches half collapsed. A milestone split by lightning. A statue missing its head. Grass grows through the cracks. A shepherd leads his flock through what was once a forum. No one notices. The empire fades. The story doesn't. At the edge of the road, you find one final gathering, 5 people, seated beneath a wide fig tree. They don't know your name, but they make space for you. One of them offers bread, another pours wine, and you realize, this is still the upper room. This is still the hillside sermon. This is still the breaking of the tomb. Not reenacted, but continued. Lived. You eat. You drink. You remember. And as the sun sets behind you, casting long golden shadows across the road, someone begins to read from a scroll, slowly, reverently. It's the same words you've heard 100 times, and somehow, it still feels like the first time. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word, somehow, is still walking. So now, the road is behind you. The dust has settled on your shoulders. The sun has slipped into the hills. And the voices that once echoed across empires have grown soft, like distant bells muffled by time. You've walked through kingdoms long crumbled, touched stones once called sacred, and followed stories that survived by flickering in the dark. You've heard the tension between Persia and Israel, between Rome and faith, between what is written and what is lived, and in all of it, one truth lingered. The sacred never needed a throne. It needed only a heart willing to carry it. The scrolls? They were copied, yes, but they were also lived. In marketplaces and prison cells. On dusty hillsides and sea-worn boats. In whispered prayers and quiet refusals to bow. The ones who carried this faith were not always scholars or soldiers. Often, they were mothers with memory, children with questions, travelers with calloused feet, people who knew how to wait, how to hold, How to pass on without needing applause. And now, you, yes, you, have joined them. So let yourself rest now. Let the dust wash from your feet. Let your breath slow. Let the story settle into your bones. There are no guards here. No border checks. Just the soft hum of eternity. Waiting to be remembered. Your hands relax into the linen. The scent of wood smoke fades. And somewhere, far beyond the hush of this night, the word still walks. Carried by hearts who refuse to forget.